I want to get us kicked off this morning with our discussion. And if you folks don't mind, maybe we'll start with Dr. Bernard and ask you to just give, if you had one, don't recap your presentation, but if you had one main take home from your presentation that you want people to walk away with, what would it be? And maybe I should have warned you that I was going to start with that question first. But I think we chatted enough on Friday, Dr. Bernard, that you probably are prepared. So I'll let you go ahead and start.
Oh, that's good. And thanks for the opportunity to be here and participate in this. The one thing I would tell you is that, forages are your foundation of your feeding program, and they're going to set your production potential for the cows. You can't really supplement your way completely out of poor forage. As the economies change on supplement cost, certainly forage quality becomes even more important. But you have to balance that with quantity. And the last point on that I would tell you is if you can inventory forages according to their quality, then you can target that forage to groups of cows or animals that are best fitted to utilize that forage, so you can hopefully improve your bottom line all the way through.
All right. Dr. Koblenz, do you want to give us some words of wisdom?
Well, I think in the presentation that I made, which is tailored admittedly toward the north central part of the country, I think it behooves a producer to understand and learn a little bit about some of the physiology of cereal grain forages and how they can use various physiological traits to their advantage and avoid problems that can occur. Learn which cereal grains require vernalization to elongate, which ones do not, and how that may affect your management. The other key point is to understand, in terms of quality, the concept of dilution. That grain fill causes dilution of structural fiber with respect to quality, but so can partitioning of sugar into a growing cereal grain, particularly as a mechanism to avoid or limit winter kill. So those kind of things can play pretty heavily into what kind of quality forage you have at the end. And it behooves the producer, I think, to have some understanding of how that works.
Dr. Fiera?
Yes, well, in line with what John was saying, forages are super important for a dairy farm. If you want to manage all these storms like we are getting right now, I think there is not better thing to have than a good inventory of good quality forage. So produce as much forage as you can to survive the different storms at the dairy farm. And then, in line with the purpose of this webinar, at the end, any forage could be useful, in my opinion, for dairy farming systems. It's a way of finding the right way of using them. So in those situations where you cannot always get the optimum, you can still have some tools that can help you to handle those storms.
And Dr. Castro?
Based on what the other presenters are saying, at the end of the day, all of that is true. Like Dr. Bernard was just saying, coming up with a way to evaluate the quality of forages. The next question is how we best allocate them at a dairy farm to make money, basically. What is the optimal way to allocate the forages across groups and throughout the year, and how that relates to farming aspects like pricing, what is the fair value of a forage, and so in practice, how we go about that is It's like it's the essence of implementing a program and how to keep track and monitor progress once you make those decisions.
Thank you. So kind of along those lines, and this is for anybody on the panel to give their thoughts. Several of you mentioned, the importance of inventory and being able to feed different forages to different groups. I know I still see a lot of people that are using a one group TMR for the whole lactation, not a high or a low group or anything like that. What recommendation do you give to a producer to use alternative forages in that kind of system? Can you feed it to high cows and low cows? Or I mean, there's a lot of variables in that question, I understand. So what are your thoughts on that? And I see Dr. Bernard, I see you look like you might have something to say on that too.
Yeah, I think depending on the farm size, you can divide your herd into multiple groups according to nutritional needs. If you look at early lactation, high producing cows, intake is more limited. So you need higher quality forages, more energy dense rations. As you get on out into mid and late lactation, intake becomes less of an issue there. So you can use other feeds then to feed higher proportions of forage and cheapen that diet up and actually make that work. You can also feed those lower quality forages to lower producing cows, or target them toward dry cows and heifers, particularly mature heifers, not the young stock, because their intake is limited as well. And you can use all those things there to target the quality to the animal needs, maintain the production, and try to if you feed those high quality forages, for instance, to late lactation cows, they may eat more just because of higher passage rates associated with higher digestibility. It's going to cost more in terms of total feed intake because they're eating more than what they need. So you could actually use these alternative forages to come in there. If you have some, depending on the forage that you select, to come in there and help with some fill. You can still feed those in early lactation if you use the higher quality forages. Small grains of all types are extremely high quality. And again, remember, I was working in the deep South, and heat stress there reduces forage quality compared to what may have in other parts of the country. So our winter annuals were actually a higher quality in terms of digestibility and energy per unit of dry matter in many cases. So you could actually work those into an early lactation ration very nicely. If I was going to try to grow a normal forage sorghum, for instance, we know that's not going to have the energy density, not going to support milk yield or intake as well. So I would not want to feed that early lactation, but I would target that then to other animals. That might free up some corn silage then to maintain higher levels of corn silage in that diet for those early lactation cows or higher producing groups there. So I think it's kind of looking at what your forage quality is. The other thing that comes into play, we all start out with great intentions on, we're going to harvest this at the ideal stage of maturity, and then it rains or something else happens. Many times we wind up with some forage that's less than ideal. If we can segregate that, then that doesn't dilute the quality we put up in everything else, and we can use that better than in the overall program. So that's my take and recommendation. How many groups do you put in? I think that depends on the number of cows and what is feasible. You can get too many groups, for instance, in a small herd, but certainly as size allows, you can feed more cows and you can target their needs much better, not only from a production standpoint, but for health in terms of forage, using those on-farm feeds.
Any other panelists would like to add to that? Nope.
I would like to add, the only thing I would like to add is the nutrition part is, I think, 50% of the problem. The other part is the herd quality. We have smaller herds, say between 1,000 and 3,000 cows on this side of the country. That's a small herd. Those smaller herds, usually they are very homogeneous. So when you have a very homogeneous group of animals and all of them are pretty much high performing animals, then it's fine. You don't need to you don't need to make groups. It makes it a lot easier, a lot faster to feed on a daily basis. So in the field, that's where it becomes really, really important that the nutritionist works together with the dairyman and the manager and the veterinarian, make sure that the breeding is on point, the calling strategy and calling rates are right, to get the herd up to that point of high performance. When you have a very homogeneous high performing herd, you can do perfectly well with just one group.
And so in that case, do you think where do alternative forages fit into a system like that?
I think that's dictated by the season a lot, the type of forages that will grow through the year, and then that's when the dynamics of the farming system and the dairy system have to work together. But here on this side of the country, we work with a variety of forages. We work with the winter crops, small grain crops, rye grasses, and then in the summer, most people will grow some corn silage. They will follow up with some sorghum silage for either milk cow or dry stock. And those decisions, it's really hard to predict that. I think farmers and their agronomists have a pretty good idea, but you still have to play by ear a lot. And depending on the market prices for alfalfa, for example, the farmers will make different decisions. So for example, right now, alfalfa is super valuable. So for them to decide to go with corn silage right now, there has to be a real incentive. So it's hard to know from one year to the next. I think you play by ear, you make sure the herd is in the right condition, in the right state, and then you can work with that. And then if you're falling short, you can use byproducts. Those different byproducts are available through different seasons. But I would like to emphasize, once you have the herd in the right state, life is a lot easier.
So I had some of the organizers had me send a list of questions earlier, and I'd like to pop in with follow up with that with a question that Dr. Winter asked. What exactly is holding back in the Southwest? When the Southwest market, what's holding back the transition to more alternatives? Is it exposure versus familiarity, cost of seed, management, equipment, timing with the production system? What do you think it is? And maybe Dr. Winter, if you want to chime in, if I didn't ask your question correctly, you're welcome to.
I'm sorry, that question was to me?
Yep, that was to you. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, you were saying what is the bottleneck?
Yeah, what's the holdback? What's the bottleneck there?
You mean for the implementation of the full program, or?
Yes.
I'm sorry, okay.
Hey, I'll chime in directly,
There,
Juan.
yeah.
Yeah, so, I think we talk a lot about alternative forages, but we don't necessarily execute them. You still go down there and see a lot of pivot irrigated corn silage, for example, even though we know that there's some water limitations. So what's really holding us back from making that step to more water limited crops, or holding us back from better implementation of forages? And I guess my question is it a research problem? Is it a technology implementation? Is it just we try to feed cows the same way all across the US? What do you perceive as holding us back from being more creative in the Southwest?
Well, feed cost is compared to the other areas. I think Arizona in particular, feed cost is a lot higher. It's because of freight. Freight is really expensive to get things done here. But in general, I think while we can characterize the quality of forages relatively well nowadays, especially thinking fiber digestibility assays that are repeatable and quickly, that are quick and cheap, That's helped a lot. But I think we still don't know what the relative economic value of things are. I think alfalfa is one thing it's very simple. It's based on either TDN or relative feed quality, but it works very well. You know what good alfalfa is. You know roughly the type of performance that it will support, and you can compare it to other things. However, when it comes to corn silage, sorghum silages, winter crops, we don't know. We know what good quality looks like and what bad quality looks like, but it's hard to say this corn silage should be $50. This corn silage should be $60. For example, brown meat corn silage, really good quality. Is the best forage that I have ever seen in my life. But there is about a 10 to 15% yield drag, and that makes it very difficult for dairymen to go with it, you know. But we don't know exactly. Maybe it's worthwhile in fresh cows or very like in the first 90 days in milk. Maybe it makes you the money. We don't know. And so people would be willing to say plant 500 acres just for that part of the lactation with brown meat rib, but it's difficult, you know, that adds complexity. But the main problem to do that is that we don't know exactly the economic value of it. And part of the problem is the reason we cannot predict the economic value is because we don't know exactly what the productive responses will be, specifically dry matter intake responses and the efficiency responses. So I think that's one from the nutritionist point of view. I think that's one part. And then there are other aspects of the dairy management that you know, like because the nutrition part interacts with the reproduction. It interacts with with certain aspects of management, and those interactions are tricky. So, for example, if you have one herd that is 2x milking versus 3x milking, how does it perform in those early lactation cows in 3x versus 2x? So things like that, you know, it's management, but it's in combination with nutrition. And then if you think basic milk, I don't think that we are ever gonna figure out every possible combination, but I think we will still need to look at the main items. What are the most important items driving efficiency, driving intakes, and try to get some quantitative data on that. There is a lot of good research, like all that research that Dr. Bernard was going through, where he compared different feeding rates of different types of forages, and you can have a really good idea of the marginal responses. But I think it would be nice if they would take the time and they go through, not so much to do those meta-analysis that come up with an equation that is really hard to follow, to understand, but if just looking at some averages, like what happens when you feed really high quality to high cows versus late lactation cows, just ballpark type of questions. I think that would help some. I think the economic and dairymen and farmers, they don't worry so much about things they can control. The markets are gonna do what they're gonna do. People are not gonna grow more corn silage, I don't think, because water is becoming more and more limited. But I think if we have a good understanding of the responses, I think that gives us flexibility.
Are we gonna look at this differently in 5, 10, 20 years based on our advances in breeding for alternative forages? I know there's been a lot of selection pressure when it comes to our corn silage hybrids, and maybe not quite as much when it comes to some of these alternative forages. So, and anybody on the panel can chime in on that. Is that part of the bottleneck? Is that we just haven't made quite the genetic advancement with some of these alternative forages that we did with corn and corn silage?
I'd make two comments. One, kind of back to the prior question. Corn silage is such a unique forage in that it's roughly 50% grain and 50% forage on a dry matter basis on a good grain hybrid. And when you look at the value of that in a lactating cow ration, it has worked extremely well over the years. So I think some of the reluctance to change, as long as you can grow that, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Now to the breeding, I think the plant geneticists are doing a lot. Corn, they're looking at drought tolerance, water efficiency there. I think when you look at the sorghum silages, one of the big things that has really changed it, or some of the summer annuals, has been the brown midrib, the rachitic dwarf, that gets a higher quality feed. It's not going to lodge on you. That opens up some opportunities then to grow a higher quality forage that can be used in there without the drag that we used to see with the normal. And some of that, I think, is going to be producers becoming comfortable with that. Winter annuals, if you're in a double or like we were, a triple crop system, I think the key is you've got some high quality potential there, getting higher yield, but also getting that growth period so it fits into that cropping system, so you can get it harvested on a timely basis to get your corn or whatever your summer planning is going to be. Getting back and looking at how everything fits into a system, I think, is important back on the farm level.
I will add very little there. I like the system concepts that John just said. I don't think that the main limitation is breeding. Typically, like winter animals, the nutritional quality is not bad. Okay, it's very good. If you see fiber digestibility on a boot stage winter annual, it's not bad at all. Actually, could be even greater than corn silage. So I don't think breeding is the bottleneck. I think from a farmer perspective, I would go back to John's words, feeding everything in the rotation, in the system, so that you can maximize the production of forage. I think that is key. And I think I put that in my presentation about looking to the alternative management, maybe the selection of the varieties that you're using, shorter, longer cycles, and so on, so you can do the most. And the other thing I would say, and here I'm touching a little on something that it was not in my presentation, but the challenges, the post-harvesting challenges, right? Ensiling corn or sorghum and then feeding out could be much easier than in the case of the winter animals. So that goes back on some of the potential limitations that we might have. I don't have data on this, but I did mention this in a paper that I have under review right now. That hollow stem in the winter annuals, I think, has an effect on how we can pack that silage that is a little harder than in the case of corn, for example. So anyhow, but going back to the question, yes, breeding could be something, but management, I think, is the big issue here.
The other thing I would add in there, and Wayne may address this, when you look at winter annuals, I think the lower dry matter yield is some factor to folks, but the harvest cost associated with getting those out of the field. I had a producer worked with in South Georgia. He actually bought a specialized round baler to make baleage, and he owned his own chopper. And he said it was saving him $100 an acre by doing that. And a lot of that was associated with the trucking to move the harvested forage out of the field to the storage area. So I think some of those things are things we got to look at to look at cost, and particularly as fuel and all equipment costs continue to go up. If we can make some improvements in that area, and Wayne's certainly done a lot of work in that area.
I will quickly add something. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Collins.
It's interesting this subject just came up with respect to breeding. I recently completed a project right before I retired with Michael Ottman at the University of Arizona. We looked at 15 different cultivars of triticale, and this was just published this week. And what we basically found was that, number one, harvest decisions should be based on maturation or maturity, not on calendar date. That a lot of the differences between cultivars are related to maturation rate. And this is for triticale, but I think it would also apply to other cereal grains as well. But assuming a constant maturation date, most of the cultivars were not that different. I mean, if you were going to harvest them all at boot stage, regardless of when that happened to be, which might vary over a period of 2 weeks or whatever, that most of them didn't vary all that much in terms of relevant quality. They were fairly typical. What a producer needs to watch out for is a cultivar that has abnormal growing characteristics, like abnormal plant height, abnormally low percentage of head weight, things like that. Something that's abnormal, as long that will cause a deviation in some of the quality characteristics, which may be either good or bad depending on what you're looking for. If you're feeding something that has a lower energy requirement, you may want a taller growing cultivar that has lower energy at the end and better yield. That may be a desirable characteristic, but I mean, for a lactating dairy cow, if you're shooting for boot stage, unless that cultivar had really abnormal characteristics of growth, they were basically all the same about at boot stage. I think other factors were far more important. The key thing there, and this maybe doesn't apply as much in the Southwest, but certainly it would apply in central Wisconsin where I worked, is what kind of a yield hit are you willing to accept in order to get that winter annual off and plant corn or beans? And that's usually the driving force in the management decisions. I mean, in central Wisconsin, boot stage on triticale will typically hit Memorial Day or right very close to that. Well, you can still plant some corn after that for silage. If you wait to soft dough, which has often been recommended as a reasonable alternative in terms of harvest, that will hit about the 4th of July in that environment. And then you're really short on options at that point if you want to go back to another crop. You'll get a lot better yield, but your cropping options after that may be limited to just a place to haul manure in the summertime, which is not invaluable either. So those are some thoughts.
I agree with Dr. Koblenz. I think what he just said conceptually completely applies to the Southwest. I think it applies to everywhere. And I will tie this up to the previous question as to what was the main bottleneck for farming dairy systems. It's basically we need somebody like Dr. Koblenz that can go to every farm every 2 months and be able to implement those cropping systems. I think when, for example, I go through a pile of corn silage, those piles would last 10 months. And you can find starch concentrations between 20% and 35%. And you wonder why. And what happens is if they are farming, say, 4,000 acres, there is a lot of variability from field to field, and we don't understand that variability. And there aren't people that understand that variability. Farmers do a very good job. They know their farm to some extent, but the problem is one of those things that you don't know what you don't know. So they will do the nutritionist says, hey, we need some corn silage, and they go and they do their best effort, and they come up with 20% starch. And in their mind, they're just following your advice, and that's where you, as an advisor, you have to be thinking and be making sure that you're providing the right advice. But when I look at 20% corn silage, I'm thinking, man, maybe I'm pushing them too hard towards corn silage, and I don't even know that they can. So we need agronomists / nutritionists that have the ability to go and look at those fields, look at the soil quality, water budgets, the whole thing, and understand from the nutrition point of view what is necessary and where the opportunities are. But you look at, for example, you look at the yields for all those crops, winter crops, alfalfa, and the variabilities are huge. So I think if we can better allocate soils and based on the other resources, like for example, or the limited or the constraints related to manure applications or things like that, I will say that that's the largest opportunity by far. But where you have nutritionists that go to every dairy, you don't have agronomists that have an understanding of nutrition that go to dairies, and that's a whole other. Like I this is what I do every day of my life, and for me it will be an extremely uphill battle to undertake that. It's a lot. So I think for students that are listening to this, I think if you guys acquire the skills to learn agronomy from a nutritionist point of view, I think you're gonna be in demand big time. Is a much needed type of a skill in the field.
I think that's a really valuable point, Juan. That brings up something that I kind of complain about a lot, is that there's maybe the least interaction among the consultants for typical dairy would be the nutritionist and the agronomist, which is kind of crazy, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense that you wouldn't want those people talking, but I think often there's too little overlap in knowledge base, and to some extent there's competing interests, like, well, there's at multiple levels, how people get paid and that sort of thing. Has anybody, on a positive side, has anybody seen a farm that has, gotten consultants to work together like that can come up with a more comprehensive nutrition program incorporating agronomy?
Not in my experience.
In my experience, I see that a lot in, maybe not in the US. I saw a lot that when I was working as a dairy consultant in Argentina. That is more a common role, being I have an agronomy degree, and then I did my grad studies in dairy nutrition. So that figure of crossing the bridge from the field to the bunker is more common in maybe in other countries. I agree with Juan, what he's saying. We should see those skills in the nutritionist to be able to discuss with an agronomist, and the same an agronomist to be able to discuss with the nutritionist. So I think in general, that would be a pending thing for future nutritionists and agronomists.
One of my colleagues years ago was over in Europe for some meetings and taking students around, and one of the more successful farms said they had a meeting each year with all their advisors, crop advisor, nutritionist, veterinarian, CPA, on down the line. They talked about what worked, what didn't work, how they could change things. Said we didn't do things just because that's the way we'd always done them. Everything was on the table. And I think when producers can sit down with that mindset from time to time and get all the parties together to talk about it, so you can talk about, this is the forage we're growing. Okay, this is the bottlenecks I see in it. The veterinarian, well, this is some of the health issues I see. The CPA, well, this is the cost or the impact on the cost and how it varies along. Then you got the input to make more informed decisions and start to put that system together, put all the components of the system together to be more successful.
I see a comment there on the chat. Meeting with agronomists is part of our strategy. Yeah,
Good.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen here in the US. Okay, I'm saying that I used to see it more frequently in Argentina at least. So.
Well, and, just quickly, when I say that we need a Dr. Koblenz at every operation, I think it's more than having an agronomist to discuss with. I think it's having somebody that is willing to try things out, like all of the studies that he shared, where they look at a variety of management practices, and he looks at the responses of crops, different types of crops to those variations, and being able to do things like that in the field without interfering with the operation. I think that's where there is an immense amount of value. So I think as students that acquire skills, in agronomy, even economics, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to sort out what goes in, what goes out, what the efficiencies are, what the margins are. And I think that's where you really start answering the questions that the farmer and the dairyman have to answer for themselves.
I have a question to start with, Gonzalo. How accurate do you think predictions are in modeling software for dry matter intake when you're feeding alternative forages? So in your study specifically, it looked like sometimes you modeled them out and you compared them, and then maybe you did the study afterwards. Was intake pretty close to what the models predicted? And I'm saying that because from some personal experience, sometimes cows can consume a lot more UNDF than they should be able to on paper when they're fed some alternative forages.
Yes, I see what you're saying. With many times we formulate planning the project, and then there is some deviation, and that is true. Now that deviation, many times you can see it in both or on all the treatments. So yes, usually when in my case, okay, I speak for in my case, what I do is which is typically what you have in the field as well. You have the forage in your inventory, and hopefully you know the quality based on the analysis of that, and then you try to match the requirements of the cows with the supply of the ingredients that you have. And yes, you run the model and you obtain a ration that supposedly is going to meet the supply and the demand, and you go from there. In the case of our studies, sometimes they are a little off. Maybe can be related to the description of the animal, depending on whether you have a very homogeneous cohort of animals. When you hear Virginia Tech, the farm size is not huge, so you have the animals that you can use. But there is some deviation from the model, but I don't think is huge, to be honest. So I don't think, and again, the model is a model, and sometimes can have some error there, but typically we are in the ballpark. We are in pretty close what we see from what we formulated.
I would add there, Gonzalo, that one potential source of variation, that producers should never discount the effect of temperature on lignification and fiber digestibility. You can have a cereal grain plant that does not require vernalization, for example. If it matures, if it's planted in the fall or in the spring, and it matures during the spring and early summer, where it starts to accumulate heat units, the fiber digestibility on that plant is going to be very, very different than if you planted it in late summer, early fall, and harvested it before winter, when at the same growth stage, because it just grows then under much, much cooler circumstances. And that'll have a very dramatic effect on fiber digestibility and the concentration of lignin. So managing around excessive heat in your forage program is not a bad thing if you're looking for very high fiber digestibility. And it's not something should be discounted. Now, you know, if you live in Georgia, there may be a lot less opportunity to avoid that than there is in Wisconsin or Maine or somewhere. But the concept is still important that in terms of lignification and its effect on fiber digestibility, ambient temperature plays a big role in that.
I agree on that one, Wayne. Thank you for that. And I will take that and stress another concept, that when we find the information there, the studies that are done, how important it is to have replication over the years and over the locations, right? I think when we see a study in which the material was obtained only for 1 year and one location, I think there is limited value on that study. I'm not saying there is no value there, but it would be much better if you have, like you said, Wayne, that you compare, I think you said 15 different varieties of triticale in your study. So hopefully in our case, in the Mid-Atlantic, many times we have to go to the data from the Midwest, and maybe what Wayne had just said applies in our case. We have to live with what we have, and maybe more suitable information from this area would be better.
Just to add something quickly to Jackie's question, what I have seen, when you grow, say, winter crops or sorghum for milk cows versus dry stock, the difference in yields can be between 20% and 40%. So as a nutritionist, you have to make sure that the dairyman is going to make that money back. And I think one really important aspect that we don't know, even though there has been research, but it hasn't been specifically focused on that, is to establish the long-term responses. So for example, what happens is if you're losing half a pound, let's say you have the perfect ration, and then you say, okay, I'm gonna feed this forage, it's not as good, but it's still, I'm only gonna give up 10% in the yield. So you know, you have to figure that out, you know, what type of, from the farming point of view. But let's say you have a perfect forage and a less than perfect forage and a low quality forage, and you're gonna feed that to high producing cows, and you know that you will give up some intakes, which I think in early lactation with super high producing cows, I think we still cannot predict those responses very well. But in the field, we measure them on real time, so it doesn't really matter. But I think it's knowing over time, if you're losing half a pound or 1 pound or 3 pounds, the long-term responses in efficiency and whether you can get the cows back. Because once the cows, once that lactation begins to shut down, you cannot get it back. You have to wait until that cow freshens again. So when you're talking 6,000 cows and you miss that window, you lose so much money for the next 6-8 months. You're done. So I think we still need, like the trials that we run with Dr. Bernard, we're running for 8 weeks, and that was already long-term for us because it's what you can do. But what happens if you want to get the cows back? So if you run a lower quality forage for 6 weeks versus 10 weeks versus 3 months, and then you put them back on a high plane of nutrition, can they come back? And I think we don't know. And I think knowing those things, because that's the question that always comes up. What if I let my sorghum go, you know, a bit farther, and we don't know those responses.
So what's our wish list if we're looking at experimental design to really push the research forward in this area? What's our, you know, obviously we're living with funding constraints in also and academic constraints. But as we're looking at designing experiments and answering some of these questions, what should we be pushing for, and what does our wish list look like?
I can
And
give you
that's for
my,
anybody.
I
Yeah,
can give
yeah.
you my number one, which I've been trying to work for the last, since I'm here at Virginia Tech. In addition to alternative forages, one thing I'm very interested is in knowing a little better how drought stress affects fiber digestibility. Okay, and based on the data that I've been looking and obtaining, I don't think we have it very clear. So in my case, I've been doing some research in trying to do here in Virginia, in Idaho. Now I'm approaching Texas. Being able to control the environment for doing different treatments on drought stress, that or lignification, like Wayne was saying, that is my number one. The problem is that it's super hard to control the environment. So that is my number one wish.
That's a very difficult problem too, because is the drought stress associated with excessive heat or is it not?
Absolutely.
Those are two very different situations.
Absolutely.
And they will cause two different responses. So it's a complex problem.
Well, you just said it, Wayne. I like this very much, because we read that drought increases fiber digestibility, but on the other side, heat stress also increases lignification. So what is going on there? Okay, so that's why I'm saying that we don't have it very clear, in my opinion.
And I would think it gets back to what specifically are you wanting to look at. That dictates a lot of what type of trial you're going to conduct, because you get into things like one, if you're looking specifically at forages, there can be some varietal differences, but picking out the varieties that you want to use that are going to be common to that area or work well within that specific area. The growing season is going to combat that. But then when you get into harvest, making sure they're harvested with the same parameters as far as theoretical chop length, processing, that they're fermented well. What's your storage time? Sometimes, yeah, we'd like to look at this shortly after harvest, or sometimes we wait till longer. Sometimes it's a matter of getting in the queue to have cows to do the work. That can affect some things. For instance, with starch digestibility, we know the longer the silage stays in storage, that starch is going to soften up and become a little more digestible. So that changes around. You get back to the harvest size, particle size at chopping, as well as in that final ration, is going to impact particle intake and flow rates out, along with digestibility of the forage. So it gets back into your specific questions that you want to look at. Comparing forages in the front end, you can do some things, switchbacks for Latin square type things, short-term duration to get some drone dynamics. I think from a producer standpoint, longer-term trials where you can see the dynamics over 2, 3, 4 months, but that gets very expensive just because of the labor, unless you can do it in group settings and have multiple pens where you can do that. So we wind up compromising in many cases to try to address certain objectives within a reasonable budget and time frame to get it done.
Another one that I have, many times when we do a feeding trial, we compare maybe 1, 2, 3 varieties, maybe 4, but at the or varieties of different forages, okay? But at the end, we have a limited, at the cow level, there is replication for that variety or for that forage, okay? So where I'm going here is that doesn't mean that that variety is going to represent all the varieties. So there is where we have a disconnection between replication of one forage in different cows and replication of different forages. It's easy to obtain forage quality in different plots, but doing all those varieties, in the 15 varieties that Wayne tested on a plot, to test them on a cow, that is another different story. So there is something that in the future we should be looking. Obviously, like John said, is going to be super expensive, right? But there we have some improvement.
I
And
think
you,
that are,
go ahead.
go
Lon.
ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you know, sometimes in forages, we want to look at, okay, how does this compare to corn silage? Corn is our reference, or alfalfa. So we just simply substitute and don't rebalance the ration. It's a valid question and get some valid information. It's not necessarily always what we do in the field, or hopefully we're not doing that in the field. You got to look at the data, and I think I would encourage everybody to go through, if they're looking at a different type of forage, get an idea of what the potential is and what the pros and cons are, as well as what's the limitations when you go into feeding there. And then you kind of know before you start down that route, how do I need to plan and address these things, and how is it going to fit into my current program?
For me, I think there are two opportunities. One is the one that the other three presenters have mentioned, trying to understand the expected responses to different types of practices, different types of crops. But the other one is, I think we need to do some, I don't know if it's research or let's call it research, how to manage variability. Because variability is not going away anytime soon. In the field, especially because there is so much variation, and so I think what we need to learn to do is how do we deal with that uncertainty. So I think coming up with some form of decision systems or ways to manage that, I think that would have a huge impact. So, for example, being able to characterize the soils of an operation. I don't know, but I'm talking outside my area of expertise. But from as I was saying, from the cropping point of view, how do we best manage what we have to maximize profits? In the same way that I think I personally have been forced to learn to deal with variability with the cows. Like we were talking about the one ration versus multiple rations. So that's what we were talking, how we deal with the variability. So if you have the perfect herd and very high performing herd, then you feed just one ration versus multiple rations for a more heterogeneous herd. I think on the cropping side, we still are not there because there aren't enough people that can do it. A lot of the people that go to the farms they work with the companies that sell the seeds or other supplies, but there aren't independent consultants that have a very high technical focus to deal with those questions. And I don't know, I haven't seen it. I haven't come across very many papers on management systems more than to deal with variability. So I think both things, understanding the responses to different practices, but also managing variability. I think it's something we need.
Very good. We're rounding out close to an hour, so I want to kind of step back and ask maybe a bigger picture question. I had this question when I was listening to your presentations and a couple of the other organizers also asked questions along this line. So what does climate change mean for all of this? What is this going to look like in the world that's constantly changing, and weather patterns there's increasing variation and unpredictability in what these seasonal effects are going to look like. How do we move forward, and what's that going to look like in the near to middle future?
You know, there's some information out there on variability, the drought, the temperature. We know in general what they're going to do. When you have a year that, well, and I'll take the Southeast as an example. When we have a year that has good rainfall, even with high temperatures, we get a lot of yield, but it doesn't feed well. Because the analogy I've always used is that plant is growing up very fast, very rapid early on. I think Wayne said it's going to put a lot of that rebar, a lot more lignin in there, and it's not going to be as digestible. What we saw in drought, that forage actually fed extremely well. We just didn't have enough of it because we didn't have as much rebar lignin in that plant. So I think that throws even more variability, depending on what your local climate is. Where you can irrigate and kind of control, you can control the moisture in the absence of excess rain, but you can't control the temperature. So I think it's kind of anticipating ahead of time with that growing season what some of those forages may be. The beauty of the winter annuals, typically we didn't have the high temperatures to have to deal with, so that was a nice thing. Don't know that we have enough information on the sorghums to understand how much variation occurs from year to year, the same way we do as corn, for instance. I think that is something we're going to have to look at, but kind of getting an understanding of what some of that variation is going to be, because as we get swings in different areas, I think it's going to just add to that variation out there. And we have to kind of plan and manage those crops accordingly. You know, the more I read with corn, for instance, depends on when a drought hits, depends on how it affects the overall nutrient quality as well as potential grain yield down the road. So I think the same thing could be true on some of our other forages.
I would say that well, it is related to climate change, but also the how the use of the land is going, okay, shrinking for agriculture. I think that is making the use of alternative forages more important, okay? When we have to go to those marginal lands to keep producing forages for dairy systems, for example, I think that is going to be critical in the near future.
I would say from the field nutrition point of view, I think we should explore the flexibility of the cows. I think we are very conservative still. I think in the field, a lot of high producing cows are fed way outside the recommendations for fiber, for example. And I think we have to, I think we should evaluate extreme situations. And when I say extreme, I don't know, say 10 dry matter pounds of almond hulls and 14 pounds of corn and 5 pounds of hay or something like that. It's gonna be, but we already have to do those things, but we don't know. Like we go by the seat of the pants and see what happens. But we have, like I have a Jersey herd that I work with here. It's a small herd, 1,000 jerseys. And he's very close to the city, so it's really hard for him to get forage. So we feed citrus, we feed citrus byproduct. We feed some beet pulp. I mean, when you look at the specs of that ration, the forage NDF is 9%. And cows are not dying. You know, I think so. For example, I think we tend to be super worried about acidosis, and in reality, I don't think it's that big of a problem. I think if we look at the probability of losing cow from acidosis, it's not as bad as most people would feel about. I think we need to challenge some of those ideas. If you look at the 2001 NRC, the guidelines for fiber nutrition, many people are outside those guidelines all the time, and people do it by trial and error, not because they know better, but you just try things out and see what works and what doesn't. But I think going forward, forage is going to be a lot more scarce, and we have to try things out and see what happens. But we don't know the long-term responses. So, well, we don't know the short-term responses for those extreme cases, and much less the long-term. So economically, to know what's going to happen economically, we don't know.
One thing that I noticed in central Wisconsin, where there's a large percentage of small and mid-sized dairies, is the relatively small amount of forage inventory that many of those dairies carry. And that always gave me heartburn every time I looked out the window and saw, you know, a 40 cow barn, maybe 60, and they had one 40-foot upright silo and one bag of corn silage and whatever hay they had above the barn, and they would go into winter that way. And I'm thinking, this isn't the best way to run an airline. You know, that one hedge against variability in weather is always to maintain a pretty aggressive inventory. And you run into this question a lot too with grazers who, you know, have an idealistic plan about how they're going to approach the grazing season, and then something happens and they're short on forage, or they run into excessive mud, or whatever the issue is, and they have to change the plan, and they don't have a backup plan or an adequate one. So I think in terms of weather variability, maintaining a really good inventory such that you're ahead of the curve, and if you run into a problem, you have some options rather than flying by the seat of your pants. One of the worst possible situations you can ever be in is to need to buy hay or silage when nobody has any. You know, that's just a bad deal all the way around. So for what that's worth, that was one thing I observed here.
So one question I've been getting a bit lately, and I think it kind of relates to some of these risk management strategies, especially with weather being more unpredictable, are these cocktail mixes as ways to kind of mitigate some of that risk. And John, I know we chatted about this a little bit a few days ago, and anybody else is welcome to kind of give their thoughts on some of those mixes. Forage cocktails specifically. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie.
What we talked about the other day, certainly if you're looking at a grazing situation, those cocktails where you have different maturities of those forages are going to help expand or lengthen that grazing season and forage availability throughout that grazing period. Because some are going to mature a little earlier, some of them later. If you're looking at a stored forage system, you don't want that much spread. You want it closer. So if you're going to have a cocktail, it probably is going to have fewer forages, and those forages need to line up in terms of similar maturities. So when you go to harvest, they're going to be at similar stages of maturity. One's not going to be over mature and one's not going to be in vegetative stage or whatever, because that will affect your quality so much more. So that would be my part of it and my take on it. They have a place. Think about how you're going to manage that forage and what role is it going to play in the diets. You know, maybe if you're green chopping and feeding forage that way, that's another way to kind of look at it and stretch that out a lot. But I'll use triticale. You wouldn't want to put triticale in a red clover, at least down here, because red clover is going to come off much later than what the triticale would. So pick that legume that would match up with maturity, for instance, on your triticale. You just change the names and match those things so they work in tandem to achieve the forage product, the nutrient quality and yield that you really want. Now, I will say we used to grow triticale and a crimson clover, and that worked very nice together. When we used ryegrass, and all this was under irrigation with wastewater, we had such a mass of forage in that growth, it would have choked out most of the clovers unless you had something that's very erect and had an early growth pattern compared to our ryegrass. So think about how those are going to grow too, and how they fit in as in a combination.
On that side, I guess I will add, I would stress what is the goal when you do these cocktails. Are you thinking on the end product, the silage that you're trying to obtain, or are you trying to maximize production of forage as a general term? Going to the agronomy side, think about the management perspective on weed control, fertilization, and so on. Okay.
I would add one thing, and that is that mixtures, the individual components of mixtures very rarely perform the same way as they would in a monoculture.
Hmm.
They will always surprise, well, not always, but they will generally surprise you in the way that they perform in a mixture. That aspect of competition is not an insignificant thing. So I would agree with what's been said here, but if you're going to grow a mixture, know why you're doing it. Do it for a reason and with a specific goal in mind. Don't just do it because somebody tells you to. That's never a good idea. But other than that, I certainly agree with everything John and Gonzalo said.
So I have a question for you guys. I think Juan made a good point earlier, at least it fits my biases, that we tend to be excessively conservative in how we feed cows. And I think, you know, in the research that I do, part of my research, at least one of my goals is to try to do crazy creative things and kind of de-risk some, you know, a little bit more creativity for the field nutritionist. But we've already talked about the implausibility of doing, you know, 15 by 15 sort of interactions and studies. And so for the other part of my role as extension, I guess one question I have is, what can we do from an extension standpoint to help farms look a little more creatively at how they use their land, how they feed their cows, and help de-risk things, even if we can't provide super clear answers on everything? Do you guys have ideas on that?
I do. I've been working on that line as well, Barry. If there is something I've been saying since I started Virginia Tech almost 9 years ago, is that the cows at Virginia Tech, they don't know how to read books. Okay, I've been trying to challenge these cows with different diets, with the sorghum or with the grass hay and all that. I think, again, I'm an extension specialist and I have the opportunity of doing my own research with an extension perspective. Doing research on these challenging scenarios, that's the way I'm walking, okay, that the path I'm taking, because that is very, in my opinion, is very useful information in the field, a little beyond the science concepts, you know, that just the different on dry matter intake. One thing that I put in my slides is we tend to put barriers. Oh yes, feeding low forage diets are going to end up having acidosis. Yes, but when you are like Juan in the field, needing to feed, you're obligated to feed a low forage diet, you have to go for it. I remember one year in Argentina, wheat prices were super low. And this farmer had tons of wheat, okay? Can we feed them to the dairy cows? I was starting to freak out as a nutritionist, but let's go for it, okay? And we formulated diets to take care of it, and everything went fine, like Juan was saying. So I think we have to, on the extension side, we have to bring more information and do not freak out with with the pure breed science, if you allow me the term. Sometimes these cows are a little more resilient than what we think, which is what Juan was saying in his seminar, I think.
Dr. Bradford, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vaughn.
Yeah, I think trying things out is the way that we do a lot of things, because the fact that you don't know what's gonna happen, that doesn't take away the problem that you're dealing with. So you try things out, you see what happens, but I think the important thing to do, because a lot of things are involved here, is the business, the success of the business long term, and trust. You cannot do anything that will hurt the trust between you and the dairyman, as an extensionist or as a consultant. Once they stop believing in you, you're done. So in order to do that, you need to have the nutrition management part, which is monitoring closely and reevaluating if it needs be, and communicating properly. In professional management, they call those systems real-time monitoring or real-time assessment. And basically it's looking at your milk. So you have to find out what is the right time window for you. So some of my guys, they look at 7 days averages for milk for intakes, for example. Some of them look at 10 days averages year over year. So you need to find a metric that works for them. And it can be done in a simple spreadsheet. But if they don't feel comfortable with the spreadsheets, then you have to be creative, find out a way that will work for them. But you need to have a way to quickly evaluate if your changes are effective or not. Once you figure that out, you can always go back and readjust. So once you get into the ballpark, let's say, and I have a section of my presentation dedicated to this. So you start, sometimes we get really hot discussing, arguing about rations. And I don't think that really matters. Like, I think, somebody can say, oh, 28% starch, and the other person says 22. I think it doesn't really matter. I think you just need to start somewhere, and the cows will tell you. And then you can move up or down. But as long as you're monitoring, you look at those trends, and you can move up or down. And once you get into the ballpark, you only make small adjustments, right? And then the next big adjustment is, say, when the summer comes in and you need to change the ration, or your corn salad runs out, then you need to make a big change and then get again into the ballpark. But for that, you need to monitor. You need to have good open communication with the client, and you need to be able to convey the risk and the cost that he is incurring. Be super transparent about it. And I think that works pretty good for me.
What I always tell my students is that cows can't read. So they don't know if they're getting 25 or 28% starch. They can't read. You have to listen to what they're telling you.
Yeah. And years ago in the South, they used to feed what they called BIRs, built-in roughage, or one-shot rations that you fed maybe 5-10 pound max of Bermuda grass hay, and then everything else was concentrate. But that concentrate had a lot of cottonseed hulls, citrus, soy hulls, other things in it. So I don't think we had the starch load. The problem was it worked great. It was simple, easy to manage, but it was expensive because cows ate a lot. As cottonseed hulls moved from $15, $25 up to $165, that no longer was practical. So you have to look at other ways to do that. So, sometimes I've found that if you can do some simple math to get at income over feed cost, yeah, we didn't get quite as many pounds of milk. And if that's your only metric and you're in a component market, or the volume, your solid skim price is down and fat price is up, what's really paying the bills at that point, and getting folks to think. So I think it's it can be a moving target. Certainly has been here over the last few years. And now with fat and everything else up as high as it is and protein back up, you know, what you ought to be doing today versus what you were doing this time last year is different. Yeah, it's nice to brag about, I got a 100-pound average in the barn, but if it's only 3% fat, you're paying a lot of freight to move water, and that no longer is feasible in many cases. So I think I always say it's getting close to their heart, the money. Then if you can get folks to sit down and look at what they're doing and think about how would it be if I change this, or how can I do this a little better to improve my bottom line? That's another thing that I've gone in and done. I think on forages, getting some producers that are very successful with their forage program, having them talk about what they do and help folks kind of realize, yeah, if you pay a little more attention to forage program, what you're growing, how you're harvesting, or when you're harvesting, and quality, they start to take note maybe a little better than sometimes when we say it. You know, if you can do some on-farm type work, sometimes, again, it's some of the presentations, again, getting back close to their heart on the dollars and cents and kind of equating then the science to help back that up. So that's some of the things I've tried to do over the years. Some are very receptive to it, some are not.
One thing that I do is, or that we do in our practice, is we have a meeting once a month to do a full evaluation of production and economics, inventories and everything. But we also have those, it can be a spreadsheet, or it can be sometimes the feeding software has that facility. We monitor maybe once a week or every 2 weeks. We just look at the trend, see what the production is doing. So that one is more like a 1 to 2 week time window that we monitor. And then we have that once a month meeting, Dr. Bradford. So I think that's how we deal with the uncertainty of real life production.
And out on your large farms, I think having some visual data there to show variation, so they are aware of it, working with the feeders, or maybe you start back even with the crop unit, help them understand why forage quality as well as quantity is important. Work with the feeders to help them understand, yeah, we need to monitor dry matter content of forages and adjust that so that we're consistent in terms of feeding. You know, finding where those niches are to get out there and identify where the variation occurs, and then help improve the management so they can do a better job on things.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, Dr. Bernard. Compliance is where everything goes out.
Yeah.
Like, I think 99% of the times that things go down is because of compliance. I mean, I don't know how many times we have seen here people stop testing moisture in the forages, and in a month they can lose, in a 3,000 cow dairy, they can lose 60,000 gallons of milk. It's crazy, just because they stop testing moisture.
Yeah.
So going back to where each variable, you need to figure out what is the right time window. Things like forage moisture, that thing needs to be weekly at most. Hopefully every 2 or 3 days.
And you know, the other thing is you sample forages on a regular basis. How much do we go back and summarize and look at that variation over the course of the year? You know, that's a picture that most dairymen probably hadn't thought about. We do some of these things in short windows on production and things like that, but getting a bigger picture might be useful there, and equating that then with production. Have some graphs that, well, what were we doing right here when production was up where we wanted it to be, and what happened over here? And is it forage quality? Is it compliance, drift? You know, tying those things together would be important.
we have about 5 minutes left, I think. Can we go around on a last thoughts? And my question is, we're looking ahead in the near future and seeing some challenges when it comes to feed prices, and especially with what's going on in Ukraine right now. We're looking at higher wheat prices and things like that. So in the short term, looking at these challenges that are in the near future, what are some steps that producers need to be taking right now to be able to meet those challenges?
And I'll go first. The dairy industry is not a cookie cutter industry. It's nothing like the poultry industry by any stretch. So it's very dynamic. Things just change. I think dairymen have to constantly sit down and look at what's working, what's not, make plans. We see prices are going to be high. I mean, I think when I did this presentation, I was looking at 650 corn. Well, it's 750 now. That is going to have a huge impact and may change some things that a month ago were perfectly fine. Now everybody's going to be struggling to try to figure out, how do I do that? We're getting ready to start harvesting our winter annual forages here in the near future. Having that in mind in terms of quality and balancing quantity with that. And then as we plant for the coming spring or summer production, then what am I going to plant? Make sure we grow it right, and then think down the road on harvest criteria, how we do that. I think it's constantly looking, monitoring what's going on, how are things changing, how's that impacting the bottom line. Don't wait until the feed bills and everything else has already come in and you look back, why didn't we produce as much milk, or why didn't we have as many components last month as we did the month before? Try to monitor it in real time. Forages, again, are key. If you have great forages, it's easy for a nutritionist to formulate diets and keep the cows healthy and keep them producing well. When you drop that ball, it's difficult to maintain any of that and be profitable. And that isn't going to change. I think that is going to become even more important as we go down the road. And then you throw in climate change, you throw in social issues, everything else. Again, it's very dynamic, and we have to stay right on top of that.
I'm in line with John. I would say two things. We are at the end of the winter. Soon we will start planting corn, summer annuals, and all that. The more forage that you can get from your land, for sure, is going to make that farm more sustainable, especially in this coming year, in this coming month, with all these context on the war and all that. And the other thing, which has very little cost for the farmer, like John was saying, monitor shrinkage, see how is the feed out of your silage. That is very low input that you can gain a lot of money at the dairy farm level.
I think the only thing that can in the long run save the day is efficiency. And so everything that Gonzalo and Dr. Bernard just said is absolutely true. But on top of that, you need to help dairymen get their herds to where they make. I think in 5 or 10 years, you need to be making north of 90 pounds of milk with very good quality and very high efficiency. It doesn't matter for a Holstein herd also. I just had a call coming. Anyways, a lot of recommendations are not even nutritional. A lot of recommendations are getting the replacement heifers right, getting the breeding right, short days in milk, good quality animals, and that takes 3, 5, 7 years to build. But when you get a Holstein herd up to north of 90, hopefully, I don't know any herds that are making more than, I think in the East Coast, Midwest, you guys have some. I haven't seen any herds making over 100 pounds of milk every day. But I think that in the long run, I think that's the goal. You have to have animals that can eat, I don't know, 4 to 5 times maintenance. And you have to do that. You have to have your forage quality. And you need to know what the flexibility of that animal is to push as much as you can within the limits of biology. Yeah, so I think sometimes we help more a dairyman telling them to fix their breeding than to feed fat, than feeding, say, bypass fat. You know, I mean, I'm not, bypass fat helps a lot in the right herd, but maybe cutting basic milk by 20 or 30 has a lot bigger impact.
I would just add to what's been said, which I agree with. I would just encourage producers, number one, to keep a very good inventory of forages at all times if possible, so that they have options. It's really risky, you know, with climate variability and other things, to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And don't be afraid to try things on a small scale and figure out what works fairly consistently for you that meets your needs. And that doesn't have to be within the traditional mindset that may have been established for a long period of time. You don't want to try that something outside the box in a big way, but don't be afraid to try things. And if they work for you, continue to do them and expand it or improve on it. I think that's part of the mission of any producer to educate themselves. And it does provide a lot of opportunity. So don't be afraid to try that.
All right, thank you. Well, some really great discussion this morning. I appreciate everybody who participated, everybody who attended. Thank you to all our panelists who took the time to come chat today. Really enjoyed this discussion, as well as having those videos posted. So we did record this, and it is going to be posted on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and review and redigest some of the meat and potatoes that we got to talk about this morning.